Today's episode is brought to you by HERdacity. HERdacity is a nonprofit inspiring confidence in women to achieve their professional goals. For resources, networking opportunities, and a strong community of women, visit HERdacity.org to learn more.
Welcome to HERdacious, a podcast for audacious women. Hello to you all, and thank you for joining me for this episode of HERdacious. I am Lorelei, and in case you didn't know, HERdacious is a podcast for audacious women looking for a little bit of support along their career journey. So today, we're going to be talking about financial wellness and money behavior. And to help me with that, because that is totally outside of my wheelhouse, is a financial wellness specialist, former educator, and author of the newly released book, Our Money Story, a no BS holistic guide to financial wellness. Eugenié George.
Thank you for having me.
It is my absolute pleasure. I am super excited to have this conversation today with a financial wellness specialist. How did you transition from being an educator to a financial specialist?
Yeah, so I was a teacher for 5 years and I transitioned to teaching, to working from ed tech companies. I always was interested in money. I mean, my money story, now looking at it, was that I told my mom that I needed to learn how to golf because that's where all the business deals were being made. I said that at 8. So I guess I've always kind of been interested in money. And then I was like, you know what? Let me start a business. And I started this business and ran out of all my money, right? Then that was when I was like, oh, okay, what happened? What went from me having some form of like cushion, or what I thought was a cushion, not having any money. And I was really upset and frustrated because on the entrepreneurial side, there's a lot of folks that say, go out there, spend more money, get this, put this on the credit card, just do what you can to make it. I definitely had that experience where I just was listening to everybody else. And when I ran out of money, there's a lot of women that have the same issue, or folks that identify as women, that they're just like, well, I did all the steps. I did every single step. So why am I not making it? And so then I just took a waitressing job and I put the business on hold and I said, okay, I need to focus on paying off some stuff, healing myself. So I went to therapy during that time. I also paid off all my undergraduate student loans.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Huge.
So while I did that, I was like, oh, okay, let me just keep learning about money. And then I got into an MBA program, and then I started to be a student for financial planning. So you kind of have two different things going on there. I reached out to a financial planner and I started working with On the Goga, which is an HR financial wellness company. And then next thing you know, I was teaching the classes and I was a teacher. So it just kind of became this full circle while I was teaching nonprofits and corporations like Blue Cross Blue Shield about money mindset, like the basics of budgeting, because I had to learn all of that stuff. So it's kind of a interesting job title, but I feel like it's a combination of a lot of different things.
What a beautiful journey you went on. That sounds both challenging and incredibly invigorating.
Yeah.
So I know one of your passion pieces is understanding and being mindful of people's learned monetary behaviors. So give me a baseline of people's money stories, these money behaviors, so that we as an audience can understand what are our money behaviors.
The monetary behaviors, all of that stuff has to do with, people typically think about it like what is in front of you, the debt, payback, invest. But what I was actually more curious about is what is the thing that keeps folks up at night? What is the traumatic money experiences that folks have, and how does that impact their overall future? So because most folks are only focusing on monetary behaviors with the present, they're not thinking about all of the other stuff that happened to them in the past. A really great example that I talk about in my book was that when I was a kid, I grew up around My family was just well-to-do folks, but we grew up in like the prosperity gospel or whatnot. My spirituality was heavily influenced by money. And because I was heavily influenced by that money, I had very different habits, right? I had the habit of tithe for 10% of your tithes. You put that to the church. However, there was no piece of, okay, once you get that 10%, like, what about the 10% that you should have for yourself? So I had to like do a lot of unlearning, that's not to say that tithing is bad. But I had to do a lot of unlearning, which was I have to take care of myself first. And then I can give back. Cause once I'm able to take care of myself, I'm going to be a better person. And then I can do the 10%. That was like a big shift for me. And I know that a lot of women have that shift of, I need to take care of everyone else. But if you don't put the face mask on yourself and you're paying attention to, I need to help these people right now, you forget about why you're doing it. And then you also are not thinking about the future when it comes to your money.
The airplane rule. Put your mask on first, then help the person next to you.
Yeah. So that's kind of the weird thing. And then the other thing is the money stories part, which is why my book's called Our Money Stories. Is like, what are the stories that you're telling yourself about money? So money doesn't grow on trees. Only certain folks, like, Asian Americans, they're great with saving. Just like those specific terms that people just say and not thinking about the implicit bias that affects them. One of the podcasts that you were doing, Lorelei, it was talking about skill building. There are some people that in their minds, they'll say like, you know what? I'm just not a math person.
Yeah.
Right? That's a skill that they have, that they have the ability to do, but then they immediately cut it off because they say that I don't have that skill. Right? Your teachers, girls aren't really that great at math. Math is money. So those are kind of the things that I had to go through and understand. But the weirdest thing was I started going through that while I was a teacher. All of the traumatic stuff that I had dealt with, being inferior of math or what have you, that all started in second grade. So I had kind of like a really amazing experience in the sense that I had a great year of being a second grade teacher, great group of kids. But I think the other thing was I was just breaking down mindsets or ideas that I thought was true. And felt like I was having my own renaissance. That's what I used to say. I'm like, y'all, I'm having a renaissance. Like this is the renaissance year. I think that's something that's really important. And I think that's a lot of women to really think about as well.
What a beautiful moment for you. So in being a financial wellness expert, you've worked with a number of other women. Give me a couple examples of other women's negative stories, the stories that they're telling themselves that do not empower them.
I think for the typical thing is I'm not good with math. That automatically blocks women from understanding their money. It's such a simple phrase, and I couldn't tell you how many even math teachers say that they're bad with their money. I did a talk at an entire school district, and that was the big conversation. Like, we had almost 500 people in these conversations, and they were like, I'm terrible with money. And you ask the question, like, what's one thing that's frustrating you about money? There's always someone that shouts out that says, there's never enough, So it's just like this normal thing, and you kind of already can predict what people are saying. But I think the cool thing is, especially with the work that I did with the book, was how can I make this holistic to people? How can I use storytelling as a way to convey how money and mental health are connected? So that was hard, but I'm glad that I did that piece.
Me too. How do our demographics change the way we feel about and behave in regard to money? And the demographics include the things that we can and cannot control, like our age or our ethnicity, our gender, our education level. socioeconomic status. You mentioned religion.
Yeah. I mean, the simplest way to explain it is the idea of the pink tax. So, a lot of people talk about the pink tax, which is if you purchase a female product, it's going to be more expensive than if the product was geared towards a man, right? Shampoo,
Yes.
my shampoo is like almost $20
Mm-hmm.
and, my fiance's shampoo is 10, right? It's the same stuff, but it's in a different package. So that in itself affects women, period. And I think, of course, you want folks that are in the policy side to really think about that. But that's like the first thing. There's a great book that's called The Color of Wealth. It's kind of an academic side, but basically since the abolition of slavery, once Juneteenth came, enslaved people were free. There has been throughout time, women of color have been barred from even having the conversation of wealth, right? One great example is Native American, indigenous women of color. A lot of the thing that was affecting them the most was their health, their overall well-being. And if your health is hurting, if you're not in the place that you want to be, that's going to dramatically affect your money. If you're constantly going to the doctor because you have high blood pressure or anything like that, then you won't even have the conversation towards, well, how do I build wealth? Right? Cause you're still thinking about day to day. So I really tried to be understanding that I'm still ignorant in this space that we call financial planning. But I wanted to be a student of learning about other cultures.
That's awesome. That made me think of a much more recent example of gender discrimination in access to finance. Less than 50 years ago, women couldn't have a bank account or get a loan.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
50 years ago, women couldn't get a bank account in their name or get a loan. I mean, no wonder we're living still in a culture that tells women they're basically not allowed to do math. Not only are they not good at it, they just can't. We just won't let them.
It doesn't matter what country you look at, women that are in finance, that's still a really small percentage of women that move up the rankings of finance, let alone have a conversation of, well, how are we going to create a new economic system around different things?
Around issues that empower women.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's kind of difficult because right now you're seeing everybody's like, yeah, let's have this conversation. It's like, let's talk about what happened and let's look at these theories that have been put in place and these policies that have been put in place that have dramatically affected how we even view ourselves. Because I think it's really important to unlearn what you just learned. I think the phrase that they say in the Latinx culture is, I think it's calladita se bonita, which means like quiet looks prettier. So even the conversation of shh, don't talk, just be pretty is a thing that lots of folks say. My grandparents used to say, a whistling lady and a crowing hen never have a good end. And I used to look at that phrase and say, like, what the heck? But it was because that phrase can be traced back to, like Irish culture. And that phrase in Irish culture is like, if you whistle and you're single, you'll never have a man, or like, you'll never have a good end. But yeah, it's pretty hard because you're not, I try to tell people right now, just sit with being uncomfortable because it's just so uncomfortable to uncover all of this. And my book in particular is not, PG. It is, this happened. This girl was taken advantage of. This is how she survived. And not only did she get taken advantage of, she's making 6 figures and still doesn't value herself. So we have to like undo that. The work is not for everyone, but I'm just so excited to be a part of it. And I think we can have different conversations with where we are right now.
Well, I'm glad we have you at the table to have this conversation today. So let's dig into the unlearning what we have learned. Now, I know that your book talks about adverse childhood experiences. And for those of y'all in behavioral health, that's the ACE factor, the negative things that tally up from childhood experiences and how they potentially have a echo effect in your life for the negative. So talk to me a little bit about how our ACE experiences have the potential to negatively affect our relationship with money.
Before I say this, I'll have to do a disclaimer that I'm not a doctor nor a mental health specialist, but these are my opinions. But I did have a couple conversations with the Financial Therapy Association, and I feel like I'm on to something. So that's a good feeling to have.
Excellent.
So the ACE study, it is a study that was done by Kaiser Permanente in the CDC, and it was championed by Dr. Nadine Harris, who currently is the California Surgeon General. Basically, your ACE score is a metric that says if you have trauma from your childhood, how is that going to affect your long-term experiences? So anybody can take the ACE test, but it has a slew of things that could help folks understand, okay, if my parents were divorced, how is that going to affect my relationships with people? What I have is an anxious attachment style, which basically means that I'm always on edge about forgetting something or making sure that I have to do everything on the to-do list because I will get anxious if I don't. Now, if we connect that to money, my anxiousness attachment style would affect my money story because I overworked, because I was so focused on, okay, I have to finish this thing. I didn't focus on my money, even though it was something that I was okay with. I understood. I used to work 80 hours a week, right? And worked nonstop and wake up in the middle of the night and work when I had an idea or whatnot. And sleep affects your overall money. Sleep affects international GDP. Because we sleep less, we actually have worse input. So it is really odd to say that, but if you understand that you have these triggers that have happened from your past, you can pinpoint where there is an actual problem. So I think the things that seem really abstract, the traumatic experiences that you have, we have to acknowledge that they're valid. But we also have to acknowledge that they're going to affect your money too. Because if they affect your health outcomes of stress, hypertension, different things like that, it's going to affect your money. So I think we haven't even had that conversation. I'm so grateful for even that TED Talk that they talked about ACE scores and was like, this is what we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about how your trauma or your mental health affects your overall long-term money story as well as just your overall health.
Yeah, no, I'm super glad you're able to make that connection and a pivot in your book. That seems like such a really valuable piece to be mindful of in how we go through life. If we're not aware of how our story has the potential to negatively affect us, how can we catch ourselves when we're making bad monetary decisions?
Sometimes I say you might need a mental health specialist because it can be a lot. I want folks to really understand how that affects their overall financial wellness, which I'm excited to talk about next, which is like the financial wellness aspect of the ACE score and our money stories and how that's so important.
Yes, indeed. And on that note, we're going to take a quick moment for a sponsor break.
Hi, Barbie here from Moonray, husband and wife indie pop duo. If you enjoy the intro music, we invite you to listen to our debut EP, Honeymoon, streaming now on all platforms. Visit www.moonray-music.com for more.
Talking with Eugenié George about financial wellness. Eugenié, what does financial wellness mean to you?
I like to say that financial wellness, the term just means the ability to have financial stability. That's the actual term when you type in financial wellness. Well, the problem is we don't really understand what that means. And so for me, the way that you can look at financial wellness is looking at the overall holistic view of your life and see how money plays a role into your life. In the book, I talk about financial wellness through the lens of wellness, right? And so there are 8 wellness pillars. If you look it up, I looked at those pillars and I asked myself, how does my money play a role into my financial wellness or my overall money story, the stories that I'm telling myself? I think one of the great things that Lorelei, you talk about is how do we create new skills? How do we build new like projects? How do we create a new business? And I think that's a way that you can think about your intellectual pillar. Do I have a side hustle? Do I want to have my own company? What does that look like? And what are kind of the setbacks behind that? Does that mean I have to quit my job? Can I keep my job? I talk to someone about it. So that can dramatically affect your money story. Different things. I talk about environmental pillar. I talked about me moving to Philadelphia and I was so upset. I was like, these people are crazy. Everybody seems angry. They were voted for like ugliest city or city with the ugliest people. And I just,
my gosh.
I was so like, what is going on here? Like, I just couldn't understand it. Cause I grew up in California. So everybody's like smiling. It's just different.
Okay. Yeah.
But then I learned that, that may be a portion of the city, but that's not all the city. So it was just all these things that I didn't even consider. And the thing that I really wanted to tie in with was that Philly in particular has a hustle mentality. The city breathes hustle. And the reason why that is because, Ben Franklin is the man who came up with 15 different ideas and fire insurance and the post office and the library, like all of these things. So people here constantly are trying to recreate, do something. So if somebody like myself has anxiousness attachment, of course I'm going to overwork. Of course I'm going to over hustle. Of course I'm going to have all these ideas. So for me, it was like, okay, one, how do I learn how to love the city? The city is literally called brotherly love. So how do I learn how to love the city? And then 2, how can I just be a Californian in this space? How can I be as relaxed? How can I do the things that I did when I was in California? I like to hike. I need to go outside by the trees. We're right next to the Appalachian Trail. How can I incorporate those aspects of my life so that I'm not over hustling? And I did say that in that as a precursor in that chapter, like, please don't clap back at me, Philly, because I love the city now because I realized how much potential I had created. But again, that affected my money story when I first got out here.
Of course. How does the average woman start on their path to financial wellness?
Yeah. I think the simplest thing is to not be as hard on yourself. A lot of times people say like, I didn't learn it in school or no one taught me. And that may be the case. That's the case for most people, that 70% of Americans live in paycheck to paycheck. The other thing, like you mentioned earlier, Lorelei, 50 years ago, women weren't allowed to have a bank account without a man. So we're at this weird stage where we're like, this isn't right. Not only is this not right, we need more women at the seat at the table. We need women to lean in. If they don't want to lean in, we'll make our own table. And so that is an amazing thing that we should really celebrate, because it was 50 years ago. And in some countries, it was just like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, especially when you're thinking about folks that are LGBTQ, just things like that. Yeah, it's super important to acknowledge the fact that it was really rough, 5 decades ago. That's not even a full lifetime for a lot of people. So just be kind of gentle with yourself when you jump into the financial wellness space. I just think that that's, to me, the most important thing. Just like when you do yoga, you're gentle with yourself. So don't expect that you're going to know everything.
Right. Gotta give ourselves grace.
The next thing is just get into the habit of looking at your money. I'm not even saying go and do your, find your 401k. A lot of folks want to jump in and work on their money and try to understand their retirement. But what I want folks to do, women to do, is to get into the habit of just looking at their money. So set time in your schedule once a week and say, hey, let me just look at my bank account. Or, hey, let me just see if I have a 401k. Or, hey, let me take my journal out, call it a money journal, and write out how I feel about money. So we really just want women to get into the habit. And once you build those habits, then you start moving into the next thing, which I call like finding your financial BFFs, right? And finding a financial BFF could be an accountability group. It can be a financial coach, advisor. It could be a therapist. Finding someone that you can talk to about your money, and get into the habit of having more conversations. So it seems really simple, but I would say scheduling time or having a money date with yourself and looking at your money can be as simple as 5 minutes. But I think we have to start with that before we start getting into the pay down the debt to do this and do that. I started when I lost all my money. I started going to Debtors Anonymous and Under Earners Anonymous, which is the money version of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it was free. So I just sat in and listened to calls and listened to people talk about how they're feeling about money. And now I have a financial planner, but it started from these baby steps. I also used Clever Girl Finance, and I would, go to the meetings, do the Facebook group, pay for the monthly subscription. You got it. You just have to start with what you know, and then also personalize it. If you're the type of person who you're dreading money and you never want to talk about it, like make it a party. Go to a nice coffee shop when we have the ability to have wine and look at your finances. Do it with a friend. You don't have to make it this rigid thing. When I was financial wellness specialist for HR departments, we used to always say the word budget just means a leather pouch. So it doesn't even mean all the meanings that we're putting it to. And so I think that is really important because we stress out even about that word budget, and it just means a tool that you can carry money in. Really be gentle with yourself. Try to take it day by day because, within the next, 6 months to a year, maybe there's going to be a huge shift and a lot of conversations with money. So I just want folks to just kind of be okay with that.
Okay, so we just kind of addressed a baseline for women in general. What about specific challenges that women of color face in moving towards their own financial wellness?
I think this is a hard thing because one, I am the person that wrote the book, so I have a very different experience. Two, I'm the person that is like doing the financial planning stuff too. So I have kind of that privilege, or I'm coming from a place of privilege in that sense. I think the biggest piece is that it's important to kind of be upset with what's happened in the past, meaning like some of these laws that have been in place. I mean, there are basic discrimination practices that are happening every day. It's particularly when it even comes to purchasing homes, right? Wanting to get a home. Some people will deny you funds. So what I would advise is find someone who is shouting. Find your financial BFF who's saying this is not okay. One of my financial BFFs is the podcast Latinx Therapy. And so she specifically talks about inequities within Latinx folks. And for me, I'm like, yes, this is the person we need to talk to. She's the person that's speaking out on things that are really uncomfortable. So I'm going to listen to her. The other person that I feel like just calls a spade is Brunches and Budget. They say everything that I would have never said to anyone. They will call it out and say, this is wrong. This is a place of injustice. This is economic injustice. And they'll say it. And once you listen to those folks too, you kind of see where folks are when it comes to that. Because I don't think I would have ever been able to fully speak up with what I wanted until I heard other people's stories. I had heard this entrepreneur who's in my area and within my circle of friends talk about how she got evicted from her apartment. And when I lost my money, I got kicked out of my apartment. And Black women in the city of Philadelphia are like 3 times more likely to get evicted in Philly. So even having those statistics in my back pocket was easy. It was helpful for me to see, okay, I'm not alone with this. Where do I need to go? How do I need to ask for help? And then also, who can I talk to? Who do I actually trust?
That's excellent. Excellent practical advice. Thank you for that. Finally, I'd like to ask you what the connection is between being conscious of our monetary situation and our ultimate financial outcomes.
With that one, I think you really should find a financial BFF. There's just no way you can point out your blind spots by yourself. It's just not possible. And so in the book, I particularly talk about the differences between different specialists and what they do and how they help. If you've never dealt with money, the idea of going to a financial advisor would terrify you. Start with a financial coach. Unfortunately, women as a whole, we have to do a lot more digging. We have to be our own lawyers. We have to be our own advocates. So even that conversation when it comes to money, we do have to kind of make it seem like we know exactly what's up and you're not playing with us. Sometimes it gets frustrating. There's kind of this power too, because it's like, oh my gosh, my great grandmother couldn't even speak up. Like, oh my gosh, I can say like, this is wrong. I can write about how people treat me. And I can put people on blast. Now, I'm not saying do it all the time, but I see where people are at. And particularly in the personal finance community, what we're seeing right now is lots of people saying how they felt by being a woman and talking about money to men. So I think we're at this really interesting phase where we're having these crucial and critical conversations.
I am super glad to hear that.
Yeah, I've been really surprised. Like people that are in the personal finance space that are writing for women are now saying, you know what? I was not treated correctly. And I'm the leader. I'm the expert. So I'm very happy to see that people are telling people their trauma.
It's important to speak your experience and your truth.
Yeah.
So thank you for speaking your experience and your truth and your expertise on these financial issues. I am really glad you were able to walk us through just the basics of being kind to ourselves as we start out on a difficult journey. Sometimes we just need permission to get started and to know that it's okay if we mess up a little along the way. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. So to round out this episode, I will be sharing with all of you beautiful listeners about one woman who fought for 2 especially relevant topics in the context of today's current events: justice for people of color and the rights of the LGBTQ+ community. For our Femme Fact today, we're going to discuss Miss Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde was born in 1934. She was a librarian, a feminist, and an activist, and she didn't hesitate to describe herself as a Black lesbian poet, mother, and warrior. Audre dedicated her life's work to highlighting the injustice of racism, sexism, classism, and homophobia through her poetic works. Much of Audre's poetry centered around her concern with modern society's tendency to label groups of people. She avidly fought against categorizing people, and she played a central role in the second wave of feminism during the 60s through the 80s, as well as the civil rights movement, and as an activist for LGBTQ+ rights. In her poetry, Audre made it known that her sexuality was a part of who she was. Her poetry came from the intersection of herself and her many worlds. After conservative Senator Jesse Helms once criticized Audre's poetry for appearing obscene, Audre clarified that her work was not obscene, nor was it even about sex. She thinks that what upset Helms was that her words were about revolution and change. They represented the destruction of the white patriarchal power for which he stood. Audre's later poems came from her own personal journals that she had written throughout her life. In one of her more famous poems, titled Power, Audre communicated her feelings about the 1973 shooting of a 10-year-old black child after she heard that the officer in question had been acquitted. In an excerpt of Power, she wrote, "Today, that 37-year-old white man with 13 years of police forcing was set free by 11 white men who said they were satisfied justice had been done, and one black woman who said they convinced me," meaning that they had dragged her 4'10" black woman's frame over the hot coals of 4 centuries of white male approval until she let go, the first real power she ever had, and lined her own womb with cement to make a graveyard for our children. Audre later wrote a piece titled Black Women Writers, where she said that poetry was her speech. Audre's words exude visceral feeling and a depth of emotion that is palpable, and hopefully, by reading some of her remarkable poetry, we can make the effort to broaden our perspective and put ourselves in the shoes of others. On behalf of HERdacious, I urge you to use your voice, for in it lies power. Keep pushing back against the injustices of this nation and this world. Do not forget the names of the victims. Amplify your voice until the violence and discrimination becomes deafened by our poetry of justice. On a happier note, we are proud to end this month in celebration of our LGBTQ+ community. Happy Pride Month, y'all. My sincere thanks to you, Eugenié, for lending your voice and your expertise to the cause of empowering women.
Thank you for having me.
It has been an absolute pleasure. I'm Lorelei, and this was HERdacious. If you liked our show, please subscribe and share with a colleague who might need a little support on her path forward. Until next time, stand in your power. Be the warrior.